you got to realize that whatever you're doing, you're competing with somebody. What is it that gives you an advantage over your competition? Whatever you're good at, try to be great at it. And if you're great at it, good things will happen.
Maverick Podcast.
I'm far from average. That's why I had to come sit down and chop it up with DJ Maverick. They know my name from coast to coast and even in Dallas. I use my talent when I'm faced with a challenge. Gratitude strength is my magnet. Close your eyes and imagine. If you can see it in your mind, then you can have it.
Maverick Podcast.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us. This is the Maverick Podcast. I'm your host, DJ Maverick. Today we have another rock star in the building. We have the founder and CEO of Exotic Motorsports of Oklahoma, the one and only Eliud Villarreal. Welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me on there, DJ.
Absolutely. Before we dive into everything, for the 1% of the people out there that don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, like you mentioned, my name is Eliud Villarreal. The American way to say Eliud Villarreal is how you actually say it. Yeah.
That's my struggle too. It's always instead of Solis, it's always Solis.
Solis, yeah.
So yeah, I get it.
I get it. So it's funny because you say that. So I was texting you earlier on Siri, and I said text Luis, and she put Lewis, and I had to go back there and edit it because I'm like, Siri,
Story
you know
of my
better.
life.
Come on.
Starbucks, it's always like Luis, like yeah.
So I grew up here in Oklahoma City, born and raised in Yukon, graduated Yukon High School. I've been married to my wife for 9 years. We've been together for 13 years. I have a 3-year-old little girl. And like you mentioned, the owner of Exotic Motorsports, we just celebrated our 6th anniversary.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah.
I also noted you guys expanded recently, right?
We did.
You built out like a brand new building, right?
We did, yeah. We actually, it's pretty cool. We moved maybe 100 yards from where we originally opened 6 years ago. And we started off in a 3,500 square foot facility. Yeah. And we are now in a 20,000 square foot facility. Wow. So right next door. Yeah. So it's really cool. So whenever people ask us like, hey, how long have you been here? Well, we've been here for 6 years, but in this building for 2 months. Yeah. And we actually started right over there. So, I can point over there to where we started. So it's pretty cool. You get a daily reminder of, where you came from.
Yeah, that's very cool. I know we were geeking out a little bit before we started recording about cars. So I think I'm just going to dive in.
Let's go.
And tell me about your history with cars. You said you kind of were always into cars, right?
Yeah. So even as a young kid, I remember, so my dad was a truck driver, and I'd go on trips with him, and anytime we would see a car coming or anything like that, like I'd try to guess what it is before it was, would get close enough. And you could always spot out the sporty ones and stuff like that. And along with, playing Need for Speed, like on PlayStation and stuff like that. Okay. Cars was everything I would do as a kid.
Fast and the Furious probably, right?
Man, that started a whole thing, which I saw something on social media the other day, probably I think yesterday, that it was the anniversary for the release of, they said the series that lasted too long, because they keep making all these movies, but watched Fast and Furious, all that stuff. I live, eat, and breathe cars.
What was your first car?
My first car was a 1986 Chevy Short Wide.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not too bad.
Not too bad. It had a 305 in it, so it was gutless. But yeah, that was my first ride.
I feel like there's levels, right? Like typical guy probably starts off as a Honda guy, then becomes a BMW guy, then probably a Porsche guy, right? Then it gets crazy. Yep. Probably, I don't know, probably you got Lamborghini, Ferrari, depends what route you want to take, McLaren or something like that, right? So what kind of what was your history there with the cars?
Man, so growing up, my dream car was a Millennium Yellow Z06 C5 Corvette. Okay. Black top, just the color combination because they didn't make any convertibles back then. So, kind of I would customize it in my own mind of how I would want it and all that stuff. So until a friend of mine, we were meeting up for dinner, a whole bunch of car guys, and I hear this sound that I've never heard before. And I'm like, what in the world is that? And it sounds just amazing, right? And then I see a bright yellow Lamborghini coming around the corner, and I'm like, nice. Forget the Corvette. I want one of those. Right. Yeah.
I was going to ask you why
there's
Corvette.
Your levels.
Yeah.
Corvette. So my dad. So I was born in 1990. So 98, 99-ish. My dad had a C4 Corvette, 1984, which is I think, the worst year of Corvettes. But I thought at that time it was the hottest car ever.
Yeah.
And so, to my knowledge, I hadn't seen an exotic in person until I was probably a senior in high school. Mm-hmm. My first exotic was that I saw was an orange Lamborghini Diablo that I saw in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
At Walmart of all places.
Wow.
Yeah, and I still have the picture, and I look back at the picture, I was like, man, what was I wearing? But I had I used to be a pretty big Chicago Bears fan.
Okay.
And I had a custom jersey with my last name on it and orange shorts that like matched the car perfect.
Nice.
Like the shoes I was wearing were orange and blue, white Nike, so it was like perfect for the car.
Destiny.
Yeah, so we took it with like our flip phone, so the quality of the image is terrible. But that was the first exotic that I've seen. So the reason Corvette is just because I didn't know anything else up until that point. I hadn't seen anything else, and then that's when I saw that heard the Lambo for the first part, it wrecked me. Like I was like, I need that.
I feel like there's two types of people. There's like the person that's just like, I just need something to get me to point A to B. Mm-hmm. And then there's people like, I want to enjoy the ride. Yeah. I like listening to the exhaust. Like it's a whole experience.
It's an acquired taste, right? You know, to some people, automotives, you know, the automotive industry, automotive fascination is not there. Like you said, it's just A to B. Yeah. You know, everybody has their own vices, right? And so for me, it's cars.
Regular jobs along the way, and then how did we get here to the exotic motorsports? Yeah,
so I started. I was actually I got into the car business back in 2009, straight out of high school, August of 2009. I was getting my truck serviced at the local Ford store, and while it was getting serviced, I was walking around the parking lot with my girlfriend at the time, and just pointing out different cars and their trims and, you know, what I thought they would probably be priced at. And then like I double check myself. It's like, look on the window. It's like, oh yeah, that's, you know, same kind of price range. And so it's like, I could do this. Like I could do this for a job, right? Yeah. I was actually going to school for criminal justice. You know, I wanted to be an FBI agent, and I thought that would be a pretty cool job. Yeah. But all that to say, I got into the car business. They hired a whole bunch of people. I asked them what you had to do to sell cars, and they said just get an application. So I did that. They hired me and 10 other guys, and they weeded all the people out that they didn't want to keep, and I was one of the ones that they kept. And then shortly after that, I realized that I could be pretty successful in the car business just because I love the cars. Yeah. And as a young car salesman, you know, you don't have the habits of those old car guys, right? Mm-hmm. Where they just they're sleazy and lie and all that stuff. And
that's the stereotype that you get. Like,
for sure.
Most people like hate
slick
the
back hair,
right?
gold. Yeah, like that wasn't it. I was just this young dumb high school kid that loved cars, and it's like, hey, I think you should buy it because I like it and you'll like it too. You know, that was my sales.
You knew
pitch.
all the stats. Yeah, and you could tell them about the car,
all that stuff.
Right? Yeah.
And so when I told my mom I was going to go sell cars, she goes, oh, no. She goes, those guys, they're going to eat you alive, blah, blah, blah. I was like, we'll give it a shot. Yeah. And shortly after that, I realized I was pretty good at selling cars because of that and just building the relationships with people. And I would tell someone like, hey, I think you can get a better, like this isn't a good deal. You're asking me, I think you can get a better deal somewhere else. Just send me some referrals.
No way.
You know? Yeah, absolutely.
You would do that? Mm-hmm. Really? Okay.
And so, you know, it didn't benefit my pocketbook, but
or the dealership. I don't know if they love that, right?
Well, they didn't know, but you know, at the end of the day, like you're building those relationships with people, and they see that you're genuine. And so I was good at that, and realized that I could make more money in the car business than getting shot at being an FBI agent. So I was like, I'm gonna switch my career. And so I switched my career to business management, and really just to get a degree in something. Because at that point I had qualified for OLAP, which is Oklahoma Higher Learning Program. Mm-hmm. And it was designed for lower income families to have an opportunity to go to college. And so even though I didn't feel like I needed college, I didn't want to do a disservice to my mom. Yeah. Because she worked very hard to get all that to get us to college, because, you know, back then they think like, if you don't go to college, you know, Hispanic families like, you got to go to college. You got to go to college.
That's always a dream,
that's
right?
It.
They like struggled and gave up so much for their family.
Right. And then not to mention that like my sister by the time my sister graduated high school, we were just over the threshold of making enough money to not qualify for it. So she had to pay for her college. Oh, and so it's like, all right, I'll milk this as long as I can. Right.
Yeah.
So I went to college and got my master's in business, but really just been in the car business my whole life. Yeah.
How did you get started? Did you just start like purchasing one car and then just selling that?
No, it was just selling cars at the dealer. Yeah. Okay. So I worked for Joe Cooper in Yukon. It was a Ford store. And I was selling cars there for, I would say 2 or 3 years. And then from the Ford store, I moved to internet sales at the BMW store here in Edmond.
Okay.
Did that for a little bit, moved into internet sales. And then as soon as I finished my degree, I was able to focus full time on the car business. And so I got promoted into finance. And as I left the BMW store and got promoted, I still wanted to take advantage of the BMW employee lease program. Because if you're not even though it's the same auto group, if you're not at BMW, you don't get a discount on like their employee leases.
Okay.
And so I said, all right, I'm going to take this job, that you guys want me to go do back at the Yukon store where I started. I said, but I'm gonna take this M3 with me. And so I bought it was a 2013 Lime Rock Edition M3.
Nice. The like E90.
E90, yeah, it would be an E92.
Okay.
Because it was those only came in the coupes.
Those are like 8-cylinder, right?
Yes,
like
and in my opinion, the best.
They sound so
like
good.
At that was the pinnacle of the M3s. Like that was
I
it.
Agree.
And so. That car was a lot of fun, and I still remember. So I guess you could I would think myself as being smart because I didn't. In Hispanic culture, like as long as you're not doing anything disrespectful, like your parents will let you stay with them. Like they're not going to kick you out, right? It's not like American culture is like, all right, you're 18, you're out on your own, right? So I'm noticing all my friends around me like paying rent, wasting money, all this stuff. I'm like, I'm cool with my mom. Like I'm gonna, because my mom and dad had split up at that point. Like, I'm just going to stay with mom, and save all the money I can to then put down on a house to not be strapped down to a high house payment so I can still have my toys, my cars.
Yeah.
And so I was still living with her while working all this because I hadn't gotten married yet. My wife and I were still dating. She was obviously girlfriend at the time. And I bring home that M3 and she's like, what is that? And my mom, granted, she's never been into cars.
Yeah.
Growing up, like she would drop us off at school in like Lincoln Town cars, and bro, it was like nothing. It was just embarrassing. Like let's just call it what it was. And looking back, we laugh about it now.
She probably heard you like coming down the street with the M3, like that.
Well, I just told her, I was like, hey mom, I got something. Like I want you to come check it out. And so like she came, she's like, ¿qué es esto? And in Spanish, she's like, what is that? And I'm like, it's my new car. And she goes, what? Like what? Like. Why in your right mind are you spending $80,000 on this car? Like, because in her mind, like you were talking about earlier, to some people it's just point A to point B. Like they don't get it. There's nothing there for them. There's no excitement. And I'm like, I think it's amazing. And she was like, where's it going to stop? And, you need to focus on different things. I was like, Mom, it's not going to stop. And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, I want a Lamborghini. And she goes, you're out of your mind.
Oh no.
Yeah. And I said, my goal is to have one by the time I'm 25.
Yeah.
At that point it was 2023. So I was 22. So I had a short time, but I told her, I was like, it's not going to stop. I said, so just prepare yourself. So got promoted to finance, did that for a few years. From there, went to be the new car manager at Joe Cooper Ford in Midwest City, where I met my now best friend, and he's my general manager now. We've been together, working together for 10 plus years, 11 plus years. And then got let go from Joe Cooper and took some time off to kind of figure out what I was going to do. At that point, I had already bought so before it was the day or the day after, because I did get a Lamborghini.
No way.
Yeah,
so you did.
I met my goal before 25.
Wow. That was quick.
Yeah, I was 23. It really didn't take that much longer. And I got fired like really, really close to the time that I bought the car. It's like, great, now I got this crazy car payment.
Did you get a Gallardo?
I got a Gallardo. Yeah, I got a gated Gallardo.
Okay. At least you got the gated. You got the right
So that
one.
was my only stipulation. Like
Yeah.
it had to be gated.
Yeah.
And I still have that car to this day.
Oh, no,
That car is not for sale. It won't
Yeah.
be for sale. You know, people ask me like, oh, if someone comes and gives you, you know, an open checkbook, I was like, no, like it's at that point, it's just not replaceable because it started with a story. Right. And the way that I was able to attain that car and the promise that, you know, I kind of made a deal with the Lord about that car, which I can't get rid of it. So it's like, you know, it's kind of one of those things. So we can dive in a little bit further more into that story later. But so I got let go there because they changed their business model and, you know, the store wasn't doing very good. And so they had to cut expenses and I was an expense. Now as a business owner, I understand kind of where that comes from. But at that point I was like, man, it sucks.
Right.
So I took a little bit of time off to figure out what I wanted to do if I wanted to stay in the car business. I ended up getting back in the car business and went to work at Fowler Honda. Was a used car manager there for 3 months, and that was it. I could not sell Hondas. I get it. They're reliable cars, and nothing against people that think, you know, transportation is point A to point B. But I needed some sort of excitement, and the most exciting car you can get is a Civic Type R.
Right.
And so it was like I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So I went to go work at a Ford store, back at a Ford store, Metro Ford here in the city, and it was a great place to work. But I was getting tired of the runaround. I was getting tired of, you know, working late hours and the grind. I didn't have a family yet. You know, my wife and I just got married, but I knew I wasn't gonna be able to sustain this.
And I've never worked in cars, but it's like no paycheck basically. It's commission, right?
So
like,
they give you a draw, which is against your commission. So it's kind of like an advance.
Okay.
So that way you can, you know, pay bills throughout the month and everything like that. But it works against your commissions. So like, let's say for example, you're on a draw of $2,500. Well, if you don't make enough commissions, $2,500, and you owe the difference back on your next paycheck when you do make it back to the store. So the goal is to make more than that. So like, let's say you make $5,000 in that month, then they reduce that $2,500 that they already gave you prior in the month.
I see.
And so it's kind of like an advance.
Okay.
So that's kind of how it works. But mainly I was just tired of the long hours.
Yeah.
You know, you're working ding to dong and one day off and you really don't want to take a day off, and then when you do take a day off or you take vacation, like they make you feel guilty about it. It's like, I'm out. I'm tired of this. And I got the opportunity to go work at Carter Chevrolet. They're out in Okarche. Great franchise store. The family there is awesome. They're privately owned, and their hours whenever I started there were 8 to 5 during the week, 9 to 2 on Saturdays, and you get every other Saturday off.
Oh, that's cool.
Saturdays off in the car business is like unheard of.
Yeah, there's usually like till like 9 o'clock or something, right?
Yes, yeah. And so this is like a country club. I'm like, I'm in.
Awesome.
When I got there, they were selling 45 cars a month, 45 cars a month. Mm-hmm. By the time I left, they were getting closer to 200.
Oh, wow.
So we grew it. It was a great place. I was there for 2 years. And that was the last place I worked at before going out on my own.
I'm always curious about that jump. It's so hard to make that jump, right?
Yeah.
Because you got the steady paycheck,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm going to do my own thing. How did you go about that?
That was the scariest point of my life. But the thing is that, so I kind of tie in a little bit to my testimony of kind of leading up to this. And I'm having a book written just because I think it can impact a lot of people about it. But it's actually, it actually goes back. So this was 2018 whenever I transitioned out of being out on my own or working for the dealership to being out on my own. In 2017, my wife and I, so we attend Life Church here in Oklahoma City, the Yukon campus. We've been going there for quite a while. And in 2017, our New Year's resolutions, like we're going to tithe. Like we're going to give our tithe to God through the church. Mm-hmm. And it's really easy to tithe through a church that you know where their heart and their posture is, because, you know, there's a lot of churches out there that get bad raps because, like the pastors just keep the money, and are they actually using it, and why does God need your money?
The stereotypical roof fund, right? Like we always have to repair the roof or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. And so Life Church, their financials are public. You can Google it, you can search it. It's public information. You can see where they give, how they give, and the church itself gives irrationally. And so what really got us going to that church was when we first attended, and this was before we were actually serving and fully invested in it. Normally, whenever they pass around the offering bucket, it's kind of like a hard, what do they need it for? Or what are they going to use it for? And it's even sometimes even a mindset, it's like, well, what do they need the money for? But what Life Church said and they say it to this day, and they've said it at every service, every location across the nation, is they said, as this bucket passes, if you're an adult that's in immediate need of food, clothes, or shelter, and that bucket passes in front of you, you have our permission to reach in and take the money that's in there and allow God to meet your need that way.
Okay.
And at that point, I was like,
that's different.
That's very different. Yeah. Like they're letting you. And of course, people, the argument is like, oh, well, who actually does that? Because it's like, you don't want to be looked at. I said, yeah, but at least they know that that's a safe spot where they can go ask for help.
True.
So a lot of times, they'll go after the service and ask the campus pastor, like, hey, earlier whenever you guys said that, either there was no money in there, or I am in need, or I need help. Yeah. And then they help, restore, and they can really do that. And so it makes it easy to give to an organization like that, because that they're really serving the community, right? And that their heart's in the right spot. So in 2017, we're like, we're gonna do this. We're gonna tithe consistently every week, 10% of what we get, we're gonna give back to God. And so we did that, and come April, tax season, we end up owing money in taxes because they didn't calculate enough and they didn't take out enough the year before to get a refund back. And this is the first time I've ever owed, because normally as a W-2 employee, you mark, zero dependence or whatever, and then you take out as much, and then you get that refund check. And so my wife and I, we sit there and we're talking, oh, what are we going to do? And I'm like, what do you mean, what are we going to do? Like, we owe taxes. Like, we have to pay this.
Yeah.
And, for exact purposes, it was like $12,431, right? And it's like, all right, well, we just, we got to swallow this pill and pay it. And so we did. And she was like, well, what if we hold back on our giving for a little bit, until we get that money back? I was like, that's not God's fault. Like, that's not, we have to stay consistent. Right. And, so we ended up staying consistent, still giving. And in sales, it's hard to give on your tithe, on your 10%, because you don't know what you're going to make. Right. So what we did is we took our average from last year, averaged it out of what we made, because, obviously we want to better ourselves and we want to move forward and do better. So we're hopefully making more the next year. Yeah. We're like, that'd be a safe bet. So we did that. And then a month or so goes by, and I get this random check in the mail from the IRS. And there was no stub attached to it. There was no letter. Normally they give you an explanation of what happened, blah, blah, blah. So I call my CPA, and I'm like, hey, what's this? I got this check in the mail. And then she's like, well, how much was it for? And I was like, it's $1,243. And she's like, that's weird. That's exactly 10% of what you had to pay. And it didn't hit me at that point. But later on that night, it hit me. It's like 10% of what we had to pay, no explanation, 10% to tithe. Like, this is, I felt like it was God saying, like, hey, I got you. Like, stay the course, stay steady, because normally whenever those things happen without explanation, in my mind and in spirituality, that's just the Holy Spirit lining up with it. Like, it's like there is a divine intervention with that. Because I've had several times where, you might not know how you're gonna pay stuff, and then coincidentally you just get this random check for like this exact amount. And it's like, how does that even happen?
It just works out. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so we got that back. We stayed consistent throughout the whole year. At the end of the year, I was still working at Carter Chevrolet. So this was December 2017. Between me, the general manager, and one of the other managers that was there was a salesperson that just had his like a plumbing mishap at his house, and it was like $1,500. And we know the struggles around Christmas time, and he has 2 kids, and the general manager at Carter was like, hey, I feel like we need to relieve that of him. Yeah. So let's come together as the managers and let's just bless him that way.
That's very cool.
Yeah. And so it wasn't easy. I'm not gonna say like, oh yeah, I was like, cool, I just wrote a check for $500. Like, I was like, but I didn't want to be that guy. It's like, no, I'm good. Like, how are you going to say no to that, right? You're helping someone during Christmas. You don't want to be a Scrooge. And so I was like, yeah, let's do it. But what was so impactful is that we prayed right before we did it. And, we prayed that we would allow him to just enjoy the season, that he would be blessed. And we did that at the beginning of December. After giving that gift and praying about it, December 2017 was the most amount of money I ever made in the car business.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was almost like an instant return of that generosity, right? And so all that to say, at the end of December, we look back at our amount, what we gave over the year, and kind of what we estimated. We did better this year than what we did last year. And so it's like, okay, well, if we stayed consistent, then we owe a check at the end of the year of a lump sum gift for our overage, for what we undershot what we were actually blessed with. And so I told my wife, it's like, hey, we owe the church some money. We owe God some money because he blessed us throughout the year. And she's like, well, technically, if you look at the net, we're right online. I was like, no, babe. I was like, we can't change the games. We can't change the rule mid-game.
Right.
We've been giving off gross. We got to stay on gross.
Yeah.
And she's like, all right. And my wife has come such a long ways. It's so amazing because she grew up with the ideology of like that. It's like, why give to the church, And so it's like, I can give somewhere else, or they're not using it right. And it's just like, this is just what we stuck to, and this is just what we're doing. And so we give through the Life Church app, and that at that point, you could give whatever amount you want. There's no limit on there. Mm-hmm. But for some reason at that time, whenever I had to give, we were $3,000 difference of what we had to give. And we could only give $300 increments at a time. It wouldn't let me do a big lump sum. So it was almost like God was testing, like, are you going to do this 10 times? It's going to hurt. Are you going to do this 10 times?
Yeah.
And anyway, so we ended up doing it 10 times and giving in that way. And I say all this, I'm not trying to say, hey, I'm not saying it like for status or the amounts or anything like that, but just they're relative to the story, right?
Yeah.
And so 2017 Christmas or New Year's Eve, we were out on the town welcoming in the new year. And I felt like 2017 was a test to see if God could trust us with a little, if he could give us a little bit more to entrust us with. And we were sitting at Michael Murphy's Dueling Pianos downtown Oklahoma City, welcoming in the new year. And my ex-brother-in-law and ex-business partner had the idea to start the store. And he's like, hey, let's start an exotic car dealership. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. But I didn't know he was serious.
Yeah.
And it's, at that point it's just talk, right? You're having a couple of drinks or whatever, and you just, it's just.
And you like cars.
And you like cars, so it makes sense. Yeah. Like, why wouldn't you, right? Yeah. And then a few weeks go by, and he starts sending me locations to rent. I'm like, oh, this guy's for real, right? And so I'm like, all right, yeah, let's go through with it, and let's see what we can find. And so he starts sending me places to rent, and this is where it all goes back to tying how you ask, like, what made you jump? Mm-hmm. In a nutshell, all that to say, it wasn't my idea. It was my ex-brother-in-law's idea. But from that point forward, it was a nudge from the Lord to say, this is your calling. This is 2017 was a test to see kind of where you were going to stay and how faithful you were going to stay to then get to this next chapter. Mm-hmm. Because there's things that happen in the meantime, and I don't know exactly how much time we got or anything like that.
We got time. We're here to pod. Let's pod.
Because it's like the testimony itself is absolutely incredible, because things happened to where, God would open a door and I would shut it. I'm like, nah, I'm good. Like, this is scary. I like my consistent paycheck.
Like what? Give me an example of something like that.
All right. So, so we would look at places to rent. Mm-hmm. And we were looking at Yukon and thinking about doing, like, we don't need big frontage. We don't need a flashy store. We're going to do online sales.
Okay.
So we just need a good camera, a nice looking area to take some photos, and advertise online. Low overhead, low cost. Mm-hmm. Everything that we were looking in Yukon was like $4,000 a month, $3,500 a month. And it's just like, God, it's just doesn't feel right. And it's like, okay, well, this doesn't feel right. It's like, this is probably it. Like, that's probably the resistance. And then it's like, I felt God tell me to reach out to your friend Michael. And Michael owns Edmund Motor Works. They do the repairs on the exotics that are, next. They were in the same building that we were. We leased the front of the building to them, from them, and now they're next door. And so he's like, reach out to them. So it's like I close the door of, oh, we can't find anything. This isn't going to work. And he's like, no. It's like, this just because that's not the right spot.
Like, I know a guy.
Yeah. And so I reached out to Michael, and I'm like, hey, Michael, I was like, do you know if he was just now constructing that building that we were originally in.
Okay.
Like, does the front of your building, does it have enough space for a small dealership, right? And we were thinking like, our minds were thinking so minute, like 10, 15 cars, right?
Yeah. That was my question. I was like, did you do the research? Who's going to be your target audience? Because it's a special niche, right? Like,
it is a special niche.
You're not just selling like Hondas, right?
Right. Yeah. And that wasn't a no. We didn't do any research, and it was just a feeling. And which is crazy is that the idea started January 1st. By June 18th, we were operating.
No way.
That fast.
Okay.
And so it's like almost everything. So talking about those doors that open up, it's like everything laid down as easy as it should in the right way of guidance. We had some resistance along the way, but it was just, so I just saw that resistance as this is not the right move in this avenue, but I've got a better way to do it. And so it's like almost staying, I would probably say I grew the most spiritually at the beginning of 2018 because I really had to be intentional to try to hear and feel what way we were supposed to go.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have this mapped out. I didn't have a business plan. That wasn't my idea. It was, and this was just an idea that my ex-brother-in-law had. Like we didn't have a business plan.
Right. And then how do you figure out like what to carry in inventory, right? And then if you're thinking about who's going to be the buyer, these guys are going to have cash, probably entrepreneurs, stuff like that.
Yeah.
You're saying online sales. I'm almost thinking something more where it's an experience.
Yeah.
And you decided to do low overhead. I was thinking a fancy place where they can come and have a whole experience.
Yeah. No, it was, we were just, our audience was anybody that wanted to buy an exotic, but it's just give that online experience and that dealership experience to where it was fun to buy a car. Because a lot of times, I don't like going to a regular car dealership. It sucks, right? The run around and
let me talk to my manager.
Oh man, it's just, you're there for 4 hours and you leave mad and it's just like, nah, I'm out. Like this isn't for me.
Yep.
And so we didn't have a business plan. We didn't have an audience. And so, just those things would line up like that. And it's like going back to how you were talking about, your inventory and how do you source it and how do you get that? Right. Because it's just not something that you get every day, right? No. And again, so we were we'll rewind and I'll tell this story. And I'm very this would be the first time I have publicly told this story because I know that there's people out there that are struggling in faith and a lot of times it's just question. It's, well, why? Why did God, your God, or, because there's people that believe in God, don't believe in God. And it's just this big thing of, how is it real or how is it not real or anything like that. And I just feel like if you pour into it and you really seek it, you'll find it, right? And so I haven't told this story because I don't want people to get the wrong idea of it's like, well, why did God answer this prayer, but he didn't heal my mom of cancer? Right. Or why did he answer your prayer, which in my opinion, it was a silly prayer. Like it doesn't deserve to be answered because there's actually people with needs that have an effect on their life that sometimes he doesn't. And we don't know why he does or doesn't, right?
Right.
But I was in an accident, a car accident. It wasn't major. I didn't, it wasn't a catastrophic accident like that. But the M3 that I had, I was doing some work to it, and so I had the wheels off of it, and so I had to take my second car to work, which was a 1996 Acura NSX, and it was a rainy day, and I typically didn't drive the NSX on a rainy day, but I had no choice because the BMW didn't have any wheels.
Yeah.
And so hop in the NSX, I hop on I-40, head to Midwest City, and it was pouring down rain, and it was right in front of Whitewater Bay. There was a truck that was coming over into my lane. He didn't see me because of all the water, going back. This car was white. It was low. You don't see those cars anyway, right? And so they're very hard to see. So he didn't see me, and so he was swerving into my lane. And so by the time I realized that he was swerving into my lane, I had to, maneuver to make him not hit me. Well, as I maneuver, it was too sharp, hydroplane, lose control, do everything I can to keep it out of the middle barrier, do a 360 and end up in the ditch. So because of how much it was raining, the water level rose and it flooded the car. Wow. And so they totaled out the car with that.
You're saying it's not major, but to me that sounds major.
Well, major because I was like, I was fine.
Yeah.
Like nothing happened to me. I walked away with it. I was able to get out of the car. I had to climb out the window because I couldn't open the door because the water level was rising.
No injuries, nothing.
Nothing.
Wow.
I walk away. I get out of the car and I call my wife. It's like, hey, don't freak out. But I was in a car accident. I'm okay. NSX is probably going to be totaled. And I make a joke to her, and I was like, maybe now I can buy my Lamborghini, you know. And I pray to God on the side of the highway, God, if some way, somehow you're able to make this happen, I promise I will use this car to glorify you for the rest of my life. And a few weeks go by, a few months go by. I start looking at the financial situation of what they're going to pay out on the NSX from totaling it out. And I think I can squeeze it. Like I shouldn't have bought it, but it was close. Like it was close enough. It's like YOLO, you know. I don't have any kids right now. Like if we're going to do it, we're going to do it now.
Yeah.
And so I start searching. And so like I mentioned earlier, you know, it had to be gated. Yeah. It had to be a gated car. And at that point, and also had to be a special color. I didn't want a yellow one. I didn't want a black one. It had to be something unique.
Okay.
And in my mind at that point, it was either a blue Calum car or a Verde Ithaca car. Mm-hmm. The only other gated Verde Ithaca car was for sale in New York, and it had 20-inch chrome wheels, and it looked like some rapper owned it. I'm like, I do not want that car. No, thank you.
Yeah.
And so there was a local guy that had one for sale, and I called him just to ask him, hey, what does it, you know, I'm in the market for a Lambo. What do I need to look at? You know, how did you finance yours? You know, different options because I'm going to need financing. What bank did you use? Blah, 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 all that stuff. He was a little bit older, more established, so he was able to get a loan a lot easier than I was. But he said, hey, I'm actually thinking about selling mine.
No way.
Whenever I get back from Cali, you know, we can go out and take a look at it. I was like, all right, cool. So we go out there. It's gated. It's an 06. It's an SE, so it's a special edition. Mm-hmm. It's a Grigio Lynx car. So it checked all the boxes, right? And so I'm like, all right, well, now I got to figure out a way to buy this thing. And in my mind, when you have resistance, I feel like that's a door closing, right? And so it's like not the right avenue to go. And being 23 and at that point not having a line of credit that high, I haven't had any comparable credit that high. Yeah. Nobody would give me a loan. I had good credit. I mean, credit was in the 700s, but I was just young and not a lot of history, right? So my portfolio wasn't very big. So I applied to like 5 or 6 different banks, and everyone like turned me down. I was like, all right, well, I guess this isn't going to work. And then a friend of mine suggested is like, hey, why don't you use BMW Financial? You know, they're in our auto group because I was working for the Cooper Auto Group at that time. Mm-hmm. You've already had a lease through them, 2 leases through them, so they know that you pay your payments. Give them a shot. I was like, all right, I'll give them a shot. So I submit this deal on a fake car because obviously I didn't have this one yet, just to see if I could get approved. And it's like I'm only gonna submit for $80,000. You know, the car was $95,000. Mm-hmm. I'm only gonna submit for $80,000. I'm not even gonna tell them the full amount, just to kind of lower the risk so I can get a little bit closer to that price point because the M3 was $80,000. And so I figured if I can get to that $80,000, they could probably, you know, loan me the car, the money for the car. Yeah. But the thing is with leases that they only look at your lease amount shows up on your credit bureau as the residual amount. Mm. So it only showed up that I financed $40,000 of that M3, not the full $80,000. But the payment is what I was using as my leverage of what I was paying on the M3. So I submitted the deal to them, and they came back and they're like, hey, you're approved, but we'll actually give you $95,000. You know, so it was the exact amount that I needed.
That's crazy.
So it's like, all right, I know that we were able to make this happen.
Another sign, right?
Another sign. Yeah. Well, I mean, because you go back to the exacts, right? Yeah. You go back to the check of the 10%, and it's like those exacts. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, well, now I get to hold up my end of the deal. How am I going to glorify God through this car?
Was this predicated on the NSX being totaled out? Did
Correct.
You need that cash?
I needed that cash to be able to make it happen. And so it all worked out. I was able to pay off the negative equity on the BMW, get out of that, and buy the Gallardo. Mm-hmm. And so what I thought the way to give back was partnering with Redline for Kids, which is a charity that we still partner with to this day. Okay. My very good friend Eric Wynn and his son Chance are the founders of that. And what they do is they go to different children's hospitals, and they take exotic cars to the hospitals and allow kids to take their mind off what's going on throughout their day-to-day and come out and experience some cars and, get to just get lost in that, because that's tough. And the reason they started that is because Chance, Eric's son, had a rare form of arthritis. So they had to they were in and out of children's hospitals, and they were into cars. And so Chance had the idea, he's like, Dad, why don't we take cars and get the kids to come out and enjoy them and sit in them and honk the horn and all that stuff.
Rev it up.
Yeah, all that stuff, right.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, I thought that that's how I was supposed to be giving back. But little did I know that he was using that car to allow me to make relationships with other enthusiasts that have the same similar cars, to build the relationships to be able to sustain what we're doing right now.
Oh, wow.
Right? And so you can only look at that by connecting. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. You can't look at them, connect them looking forward. And so it's like, that was the connection that he made. And now what we're able to bless families and give back to charities. And so it's like, I'm still using that car to glorify him. I'm holding up my end of the bet, but now he entrusted me with his business. Right. And so because of that car, I was driving it around Yukon one day. This was probably back in 2015, 2016. So before we started the dealership, a guy in a red Shelby Raptor is behind me. And he's like riding me, right on me, and honks at me, tells me to move over and go park. And I'm like, this guy's about to fight me. Like, what'd I do?
Or he's going to ask you, what do you do for a living, right?
And that's exactly what he did.
Oh, yeah?
That's exactly what he did. So we pull over into the parking lot, which is actually right in front of, I remember where it was, and it ends up being one of the family founders of Yukon National Bank.
Wow.
And so it was Ray Wright. And Ray's like, man, cool car. Like, just wanted to see it. I'm into cars too. I was just driving a Shelby Raptor. And little did I know, looking backwards, we actually sold it to him at the Midwest City store, the Raptor he was driving. And so, I've always known about the Wright family growing up in Yukon, because, they're a very big name in Yukon, but I never met any of them. And so with him pulling me over and telling me what he does, we swap numbers, and, hey, if you ever need anything or out on a cruise or whatever, call me. It's like, yeah, cool. So if it wasn't for that car, me driving that car at that point in time, I wouldn't have made that connection.
Yeah.
So fast forwarding back to the starting the dealership, after visiting with Michael about that location and saying, all right, well, I think this will work. But we're like, man, rent's probably going to be really expensive at this place.
Yeah.
And he said, well, actually, I'm hiring a technician, and I was friends with him because he serviced my car. His name is Steve, and he was one of the head technicians at the BMW store, but he would service all of the exotics that were already in town out of his garage at home. So he was like that good.
Yeah.
And he also managed a private collection of cars that was right around the corner. And so he's like, so Steve's going to be working with us. So since, our businesses kind of piggyback off each other, we'll knock off $500 on rent and we'll just charge you $4,500. It's like, done.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what we were going to pay for it. And it's hole in the wall warehouse. Like, this is in Edmond, on frontage. Like, this is going to work. But now we have to find someone to back us, right? And so...
and what was that magical number? Because you got to stock up inventory.
There wasn't a magical number.
You
at
didn't
this
have
point.
a number?
No.
Wow.
So it kind of, I'm telling you, like, it all, like, just these are these doors that just keep working and keep opening, and just these bricks that are being laid for this foundation. And so we really didn't have a number, but we were trying to find, okay, so like Ally Financial, they have a floor plan company, but Ally's not going to give an independent any opportunity. And so it's like, who do we ask? And then I remembered, reach out to Ray. They own Yukon National Bank. And so I call Ray and I'm like, Ray, would you guys give a small business, a loan to start? And he's like, yeah, maybe, I think so. He goes, I don't really, I'm not involved in the day-to-day anymore. Reach out to my son, Carson. He's over all of it, and see what we can do. I was like, all right. So I reach out to Carson and hit him up and let him know who I am. And I met his dad and all that stuff. He's like, yeah, I think we could probably work something out. I'm going to send you these, these forms to fill out. Go ahead and fill them out. And let's meet next week. I was like, cool. So I'm telling Michael, it's like, all right, I'm meeting with the bank. I'll know at this point whether or not we're in or we're out before I give you commitment on renting your spot. And I remember it was on a Wednesday, and it was snowy outside, sometime in February. But I was on the treadmill. I was working out before going to the bank that day, And the verse of the day was Joshua 1:9, and that's on all of our merch right now. It's actually on the back of the shirt that I'm wearing right now, and it's on our door whenever you walk into the dealership, because that's just our verse that paved the way. Because it says, "Do not be discouraged or afraid, for I am with you." It's like reading that verse on the day that this is sink or swim, right? Mm-hmm. We're about to go to the bank in a few hours, and if they say no, we've got no business.
Yeah, and this is like your Hail Mary, right? Like all the other banks were denied.
Nobody's like, this is it. This is the last shot.
Yeah.
And so we walk in, and we walk into the bank, and before we walk in, I pray, and I was like, God, just let your will be done. I pray that you allow us to say the right things, do the right things, if this is your will. Mm-hmm. So we walk in, we sit down, a conference table just like this. Me, my ex-business partner, Carson, and then another bank exec, and we're sitting there. We're kind of telling them the idea of what we want to do and how we want to get started. And they're asking us questions. It's like, well, why do you think that you can do it? And, we're telling them why. And it's because of the relationships that we have with these clients and with these people. And he's like, well, what about that Khalidi guy? Because he's wanting to do the same thing over off of Broadway, which is really close to where you guys, and he's got a lot more money than you do. It's like, yeah, I kind of heard about him already. And, and honestly, I just think it's because we have the relationships with people to be able to sustain this. Like, I've never seen him out at a Cars and Coffee. Mm-hmm. He's just a wealthy guy with money that has a cool car, right? But we're in this community.
You're like car guys.
Yeah, exactly. And so he's like, yeah, okay. And so, and then at the end of the day, he's like, well, how much do you need? I'm like, 250,000.
See, that was my question.
Yeah.
Like, what number?
And
did
I
you
just
land
threw
at?
it out.
You
I just threw it out.
threw it
Like,
out?
it's like, I need 250,000.
Okay.
And he goes, okay, done.
But that's like maybe one Lambo or something. Like,
right.
You know what I mean? Like,
right. So it's like, I just needed something, right? Like, I wasn't trying to get greedy. Like, at this point, I needed to just have something,
okay.
right? And so he's like, okay, yeah, done. And I'm like, you want to check out my credit first? You want to look at these financials? And he's like, no. He's like, we don't need them. He goes, we feel like if anyone can do it, it's you.
Really? And
he goes, we'll still need the financials, obviously, to review them and make sure that everything's good for, accounting purposes and checks and balances. Mm-hmm. But no, you can have it. You've got it. And I was like, at that point, that was pivotal for me, because you just don't walk in somewhere and someone gives you $250,000.
No, because they're going to ask for assets. They're going to ask for
all
a
of it, business plan,
like
all that stuff.
Yeah.
Dude, my wife and I, we were in the process of refinancing our house at that time.
Yeah.
To go from a 30-year note to a 15-year note. The rate was going to go down by 2 points, and like the payment was going to go up $100. Mm-hmm. So it was like a no-brainer, right? Like, it's like you're going to save a ton in interest, but just do it. And it was so hard to get that refinanced, right. And it was around the same amount of money. So much so that they asked me, they're like, well, you took some time off work.
No way.
Like, why did you take time off work? Like, well, that's not consistent. I'm like, I took time off work because I could.
Yeah,
like,
that's crazy.
Because I didn't overspend, and I had a little bit of savings account, and I could afford to take 2-3 months off. Like, but because of that, you're going to give me some resistance. And like, well, your wife isn't, she's not working in the industry that she went to school for. So we need a letter explaining as to why.
I've never heard of that. That's crazy.
And every time I tell a story, everyone says the same thing. This
crazy.
Was so hard to get a house refinanced. Like, I've already made these payments. I'm not behind. Like, I'm just asking to pay you an extra $100 a month.
Yeah.
And this was a long, drawn out ordeal. Yet I walk into this bank and they give me $250,000 like that.
Wow.
That doesn't happen unless do not be discouraged or afraid, for I am with you. Mm-hmm. It's like, it makes sense. That's the day, the verse of the day on that day. We walk in, that happens. At that point, I'm like, all right, God, I'm fully surrendered. Like, regardless of what happens, like, I'm listening. Show me where you want me to go. So I call Michael back and I tell him, hey, we got it. We got a line. We're good.
Wow.
And so my mind shifts to, okay, now we need to start working on websites, working on development, working on all this. And so then we call Michael, tell him that, and I call Steve, the technician that's going to come in and start working with him.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, Steve, I heard that you're going to come, because it's kind of hush-hush. We didn't want it to get out yet because he was still working where he was working, and he didn't want to get let go because he was going to come work over here because this, the shop where they were repairing cars wasn't ready yet. And I'm like, is this true? Are you planning on coming over? And he goes, yeah. He goes, I said, all right, cool. So this is going to work. Like, we've got the service center that they can work on the cars that we're going to sell. And then I said, you have a private collection that you maintain. I was like, what do you think if, like, we're able to borrow some of these cars, like just to have content and build a website and everything like that. He goes, man, he goes, I don't think it would be an issue, but the problem is that the guy that owns these cars, he just passed away.
Oh man.
It's like, that's terrible. Like I hate to hear that.
Yeah.
So it's like, there goes my shot of doing that. But then it's like something
But I like
clicks.
your creative thinking. Though.
Yeah, but then it clicks. It's like, what are they going to do with the cars then?
Yeah.
Are they going to keep them or are they going to sell them? And so that's where we started the consignment part of it. So we were able to have access to these cars before we even operated. And this was a collection of like 7 or 8 cars, maybe 9 cars. And these were all like Aston Martin Vanquish, Ford GTs, Bentley Continentals. Like this is high-end cars.
Yeah.
And so we were able to have access to that inventory before we even started. So like going back to what you were saying, how do you acquire these cars?
Yeah.
250K is like one Lambo.
That's like not even probably,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
But because of the way that everything was set up, God brought us inventory before we even got started.
Yeah.
And these are like heavy hitters, like
and low risk because
low
you're
risk.
not really
I didn't buy
tied,
it.
right?
I didn't buy it. We sell it for a fee, right?
Yeah.
And so, so it's like, all right. So he's like, do you think they'll let us sell the cars? He goes, well, let us see, because all that goes to, probate and stuff like that to see kind of what it all works out. He's like, I'll get back with you. So in this meantime, I'm thinking to myself, okay, am I going to be able to work where I'm working at now at Carter Chevrolet and do this at the same time? Because I didn't want to fully commit because I was still a little bit hesitant on it.
Yeah.
And so I told the owner at Carter what I was wanting to do. And I was like, trying to sell her on the fact, like, I can do both. Like, it's not a conflict of interest. You're selling Chevys, I'm selling Lambos. Like, it's not going to, we're not competition, right?
Right. Yeah.
And plus, at that point, I had a business partner that he was going to be able to do that while I kind of just guide it in the right way. Mm-hmm. And she goes, all right, well, she goes, let me pray about it over the weekend and I'll get back with you and see kind of what we want to do. So Monday comes around, I have a meeting with her, and so this was Friday whenever we left. She's going to pray about it over the weekend, get with me on Monday. Friday on my way home, I was riding Cody, the guy that I met, that's now my general manager, met at Joe Cooper. He was actually working with me at Carter at the time, and we were carpooling because we live really close to each other. Oak she was probably like 30, 35 minutes from where we live, so we just figured we could hang out, chat on the way to and from work.
Yeah.
Well, after he knew what was going on, I told him everything about it. And on my way home after that, I was just silent. Like I didn't know. I was staring outside the window on my way home thinking like, I could not have a job on Monday. And this is like in March. Mm-hmm. So we're not supposed to open until May. So it's like 2 months, no paycheck, starting a business. It doesn't really add up, right? Yeah. Like you have to have equity.
But you had the
and
250
capital.
And you already kind of had an inventory.
But the 250 was only to buy cars. So it wasn't to pay for insurances.
So you couldn't use it for the lease or anything like that?
It was solely just to buy a car.
Okay.
And so, or cars. So it's like, all right, we don't want to spend all that 250 on one. We want to, want to average it out on some others. So it's like, I was just silent on the way home. And I remember it was a Friday because every Friday, my wife and I would have date night. Mm-hmm. And we would go to Texas Roadhouse. And I get home and I tell her, we were in our closet. And I'm like, hey, I had to tell Leisha Oshman, she's the owner of Carter Chevrolet. I had to tell her what's going on, and she's going to let me know what her decision is on Monday.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay. Fear was just sinking in on her. She's like, what are we going to do? Like, what happens? And we go to get into my truck, and I have my playlist on Pandora on the Bluetooth, and the first song that comes on is Word of God Speak. And the first line of that song says, I find myself at a loss for words, but the funny thing is it's okay. And it's like, at that point, I felt like God was talking to me through that song. It's like, that was me on the way home. Yeah. I didn't know what to say. I was just staring out the window. I don't know what to say, but the funny thing is it's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. Regardless, it's going to be okay. And so that song plays, and then the next song that plays after that, we've never heard, but it's called Fear is a Liar. And the song starts playing, and I look over at my wife, and she's in tears. She's bawling. And so I'm like, what's wrong? Like, so I pause the song, and I'm like, hey, babe, like, you okay? What's going on? She goes, I was literally telling myself right before that song started, I'm so scared. And so it's like, the first song was like to me saying, hey, you find yourself at a loss for words, but the funny thing is okay. The second song was for her. She's like, fear's a liar. Like, don't listen to that fear.
That's crazy.
Right? Yeah. And so, we go to Texas Roadhouse, and we just, whenever we get there, we just pray. And we're like, God, we know you're here. We know your presence is with us. We know you're guiding us. Just give us the peace, give us the comfort, give us the direction that you want us to go. And so we go about our night. I go to work on Monday, have a meeting with the owner, and she says, hey, we don't feel like it's going to be a conflict of interest, but it's going to be a conflict of time. And so we're going to have to let you go.
Oh, man.
But she said, if my dad were here, Mr. Carter was an amazing man. I never got the, honor to meet him, but I just heard amazing stories. She goes, if my dad were here, he would do this for you. And I just want to honor him. And she said, here's $10,000. I want to be your first investor. Go start your business.
No way.
So I get fired, but I get 10 grand. And it's just such a blessing, right? And so I call my wife on my way home. I'm like, hey babe, I just got fired, but I got a $10,000, to kind of hold us over. And she just starts like planning hysteria, like, what are we going to do? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you heard I got fired. You didn't hear I got a little bit of money to hold us over, because that was on top of my already, salary and commission and stuff like that. And so it's like, so at that point, that was just a little bit of encouragement. It's like, all right, push you forward, keep going. And then a few weeks go by, and as a finance manager in the car business, you're able to do temp work at other dealerships. And I get a phone call from the guy that does all that stuff. He's like, hey, I need you to temp out at Jim Norton Toyota. Their finance guy's going out of town or whatever. I'm like, nah, I'm good. Like, I don't have time. I'm doing this business. And then a week later, he calls back again. He's like, I need you to go do this. And at this point, I was like, okay, if it happens twice and that, it's like almost like now we need to ask, like, do we need to do this? And so I go and do that. And the first day that I go in there, I see a deal jacket with the name Bob Funk. And Bob Funk, for those of you that don't know, he owns Express Personnel here in Oklahoma. Very, very wealthy guy. And his ranch is out in Yukon where I grew up. So if you lived in Yukon, like, you knew of Mr. Funk. I'm like, why did he come by a Toyota? And they're like, well, he actually came to co-sign for, a nephew or something. It's like, oh, okay, cool, whatever. So I temp for the 3 days, and they said, hey, can we hire you? I'm like, no. I was like, I'm starting my own dealership. And they're like,
yeah.
Well, what if we just pay you the daily rate and you can just work here until you start your gig? I'm like, okay, cool. So it's like in the moment of fear where you were like, is God going to provide? Is God going to provide? He brought me this opportunity for this job.
Crazy.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I started working there. I started doing temp work. And a friend of mine calls me while I'm working there. My days off were Wednesdays. A friend calls me on one of my days off, and he's like, hey, I heard that you were starting a new dealership with exotic cars. I've actually got a friend of mine that wants to sell his Lamborghini. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like, I didn't want to tell him, like, I don't have a place to put it yet, or I really don't have anything set up. But it's like, I can't tell him, like, no, I'm good, because this is what we're going to go do, right? It's like, yeah, I'll call him. And so I call him up, or I don't call him. He calls me up again next week and says, hey, did you ever reach out to my friend? And I'm like, no, I didn't. I got busy, whatever. So it's, again, that second time, right? That second prompting. It's like, now I need to call this guy. So I call him on a Monday, and I have conversation with him, and it was a balloon white Gallardo Spider, 2007 model. And it's like, I have this number in my mind that I want to offer him, but I don't want to lowball him, but I have to make it worth my time, because I'm going to have to sit on this car for 2 months before I'm able to sell it, because of our, we had our license and everything like that, but I didn't have frontage. I didn't have anywhere to go.
Did you have a
advertise.
website built out at least?
Kind of. Like, it was like in beta. Okay. And so I'm like, I don't want to lowball this guy, but it's like, all right, I have this number on my mind. And it was 93 grand. Mm-hmm. I think the car was probably worth like maybe 112, 115. So it was like, if I'm going to make this, like, I have to make it worth it, right? Yeah. Obviously, to go down there, I don't have any transports. Like, I have to take the time to go down there, go to Houston, pick it up, bring it back, all that stuff. And so I call him up and I have this conversation. I'm like, man, with all due respect, like, what number are you wanting for the car? He's like, I'll take 93 grand for it. I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
No.
Yeah, it's like, so now it's like, all right, I'll be there on Wednesday.
Jeez.
And so we drive down on Wednesday, we pick up the car, we come back, and Thursday morning, I go into work, and if you've never seen Bob Funk out in public, he's always wearing this massive cowboy hat. It's like you can't mistake him. You know who the guy is. And I come back to work Thursday morning, and I asked the managers, like, hey, why is Mr. Funk here? It's like, oh, we have to recontract him because the lender wanted him first instead of a co-signer. It's like, all right, cool. So I'll bring him into my office. And I start having conversation with him and building rapport with him. And I'm thinking to myself, how do I tell this guy that I know is into cars, that has the ability to buy what I'm going to be selling, that he's a potential client without just saying, hey, man, I know you have a lot of money. I want to sell you this car. Like, there's got to be a finesse to it, right? And so it's like, I'm thinking, it's like, how am I going to tell him? And so as I go through his deal, it's just, we're just there, business as usual, checking off everything, making sure everything's good. And then I say, hey, Mr. Funk, give me a moment. I'm going to go in there and make sure that the manager reviews everything, that we did everything correctly, so you don't have to come back a second time.
And you lay down the Lambo keys before you walk in?
No. So what I did is I said, because I'm just a temp agent here, but I'm sure you don't know anything about temp agencies.
Yeah.
Kind of like kidding with him, because that's what he does. He owns temp agencies. And so he laughs. He's like, you're really good at what you do. He goes, why are you a temp? I said, well, funny you ask, I'm actually starting my own dealership.
Nice.
He's like, well, what kind of cars are you going to be selling? I'm going to be selling, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, all that stuff. And he goes, I've always wanted a Lamborghini. And at this point, it's like, okay, God, you can't make it this obvious.
That's crazy.
And he's like, what color is it? I was like, it's white. He goes, I want a white one. He goes, is it a convertible? I was like, yep. He goes, why don't you bring it by the house on Sunday? Pulls out a business card, writes down a cell phone number, gives it to me. And it's like, what? Like, how did I go from, like, this is just way too, like I'm saying, like, he's just laying down these bricks to be able to just make this thing work. And this was in April. And I'm thinking to myself, it's like, he's in his late 70s, early 80s. Like, he's not going to buy this Lamborghini. It's uncomfortable. It's rough.
Yeah.
Hard to get in and out of. Like, if the guy gets in it, like, I'm not going to have to help him up. Like, it's not going to be comfortable for him. Mm-hmm. So Express Personnel, their colors are blue and white, right? And I'm thinking to myself, I can sell him something, but what is it? And then I remembered in that collection of that guy that passed away, there was a white Bentley convertible with a blue top, with white interior, light oak wood. I mean, beautiful, beautiful car, perfect car. So I call him up. I say, hey, Mr. Funk, not only do I have this Lambo, but I also have this Bentley that I think you might like.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I'll bring that one by the house too. So I'm like, all right, cool. So here we go. And I take pictures of, document all this stuff. It's like, I'm pulling up to his mansion, gates and everything, Bentley, Lambo, pulling in. And it's like, we pull up, long story short, he ends up buying the Bentley, not the Lambo. But again, if I wouldn't have made those connections, and it's like God just laying out these things that work.
Right.
We sold our first car before we were even open. And so it's just like, those are the things that's why it's a calling of what we do. And so I know that probably took like an hour or something.
No, it's fine. Outside looking in, it almost seems impossible to build something like you build, just the amount of capital that you need to do that.
Well, I get asked all the time. Like, I got asked this morning. It's like, how'd you start this? Like, you just made up money. It's like, nah, actually not at all.
Yeah. And also like finding your buyers, right? We're in Oklahoma, right? So
right.
Maybe if you're in Cali or something like that, there's a lot more artists. There's like more entrepreneurs. There's a bigger market, right? So here, like, I don't know, you tell me, what is it difficult to find your buyers? How do you source the buyers?
So we sell nationwide, globally. Actually, we sold a car to Dubai, Africa, France, Tokyo, Germany, all over, because we sell online. And one of the reasons that people have tried what we're doing before and it has failed is because they were thinking so small to where it's like, oh, we're only going to sell to this market. Yeah. In Oklahoma, it's not LA, it's not Cali, it's Oklahoma. But the thing is there's so much money here, and there's a lot of people that are car enthusiasts that I have met over the years where when we source our cars, there are people that bring us our cars to sell them. And so we're catering to them, selling their cars, selling them out of state, but just doing those transactions that way. And so because of that, there is no limit. Like it's not just Oklahoma, but there's quite a bit of money here. You know, people always ask me like, "Oh, do you sell your Thunder Players cars?" I've only sold 2 Thunder Players cars.
Yeah.
Everyone else is just regular people.
The thing I always wondered too, if you have like a Lambo or a Ferrari here in Oklahoma, where do you get it serviced? I guess if you have that kind of money, you don't worry about it. You just ship it somewhere or what?
So that was a concern until we had Edmond Motor Works that was next door to us, that they serviced all the cars. So right here, we serviced them here. I mean, they've serviced a friend of mine's Veyron, you know, here in Oklahoma. So they can service it. He's you know, they're good. And so you don't have, it makes it so convenient. And they're right next door to us. As so much so that's a lot of times people confuse us and they think we're the same business. It's like, oh, you own it? I was like, no, Michael owns that. We own this, you know. But because it's such as like a symbiotic relationship, it works. And so that's where they get them all serviced.
Yeah. And throughout the ownership of the dealership, there's never been a point where things haven't magically lined up. Because to me, it seems like there's a critical point and then something lines up for you.
No, listen, but there are times where things don't line up. But what I have learned is going through those is that even whenever they don't line up, there's a lesson to be learned. There's something that God's trying to show you or prepare you for through that trial, and it's just a season. So right now it's tough. Yeah, you know, we just got into this new facility. You know, it's election year. People aren't spending as much as it is.
Interest rates are crazy.
Yeah. But the thing is like we've always had just enough. And I've learned to not worry because I know that God's going to provide just enough. Some seasons it might be in abundance, other seasons it might not be. But it hasn't always been smooth sailing. I mean, as a matter of fact, that was the easiest part, is just starting. The hardest part has been sustaining. Yeah. Right? I mean, we have outside factors, theft, fraud. It's just it's definitely challenging. But you know, as an entrepreneur, sometimes we think it's like, why are we even doing this? And 6 years later, it's easy. It's encouraging even to myself to retell my story and listen to it because there's a why behind it. And I get lost in the day-to-day and the financials and the numbers and accounting and this and that to where you lose a little bit of the spice, a little bit of the edge. But then you get reminded, like this morning, I was able to talk with a lady that was in there getting some service work done with us. You know, she was in a tough spot and she was looking for a church home. And it's like those things, even though it might not be smooth sailing, now the business is up and running. The ministry, like I like to call it, is up and running because what we do is, even though we're not a church there, and I'm not a pastor, like what we do is we're ministering to people, right? And so God will bring me people like that, like, you know, that just need someone to talk to. Yeah. Like she was literally just getting her Maserati service and she told me her whole life story about, you know, her ex-husband, abusive relationships, you know, her mom, her brother, and drug addictions. And it's just like, but God calls us to be there for those people and just bring restoration and just be there for that moment. And so I get reminded in times like those, it's like, regardless of the hardships that you're going through or whatever struggles you're going through, that's your purpose. That's your why. You're there to be someone for that person at that point in time.
So hearing you say that, it almost seems like the drive, your motivations has shifted a little bit. Yeah. From being that car guy to now you're doing something bigger.
Sure. Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, selling cars is what we do, but it's not why we do it. It's a tool. And I've always used the cars as a tool to get to that point because at the end of the day, as followers of Christ, what we're called to do is go out there and make disciples and share the word, share the gospel, let people know the good news. And we get lost in this day-to-day, in this chase of success and this hustle. And if I can just have enough, or if I can just have this much, then I'll be okay. But at the end of the day, none of that brings you the true joy that you get with your salvation. And so that to me it's what shifted. So the car dealer, like that's the fun part, but that gets people in the door and then we can really just be there for people. You know, we partner with another charity called Heart and Home Makeover. And they are there for, it's mainly women that need their assistance, but for, they come out of, you know, addictions or if they were incarcerated, they come out of these, they go into a home that's also, that's started by Amy Groeschel, which she's Craig Groeschel's wife, with the senior pastor at Life Church, where they are a home to these women to help them get back on their feet, to help them get back out there. And then they get government assistance to get into these homes or a place to live. But at the end of the day, it's they're still empty houses.
Yeah.
It's almost more debilitating going into this place to where there's nothing in there and it feels empty than being back at the home where they were trying to, help these women get back on their feet. And so we're able to partner with that charity, because now what they do is they go into these homes and they fully furnish a home to give them hope, to let them like take a burden off their shoulders, to not have to worry about it. And I got to go to work and make enough money to maybe get a couch or get a bed, because a lot of times these women, they're sleeping on air mattresses and they have families. But what the biggest thing that these women tell us that they're happiest for is the smallest things, like bath towels and washcloths. It's not a bed, it's not a couch, but you're bringing restoration and you're bringing hope and you're bringing healing to them. And so that's just what we've been able to do through this. So I mean, the cars it's definitely fun. I enjoy it. But there's more to it. It's definitely there's definitely a deeper level.
Than cars.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'm sure you get to drive anything you want at this point, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Dream 2-car garage. What is it going to be?
First one's an LFA. Okay. That's an easy one, it's just because that's the best car I have driven, and so I can. I'm glad that you gave me two, because if you gave me
you gotta have your daily, and then you gotta have the
well,
weekend,
I think I don't know. I'd probably daily. So you would, well, I mean, I wouldn't daily the LFA. I'd probably daily like maybe a Koenigsegg or something like that. Okay. But the LFA has just been. There's a lot of cars out there that cars these days are too easy to drive, right? And so they're almost, you're numb to it. But the LFA, it's still a little raw. The sound is incredible. Like Yamaha, the way that they engineered that exhaust for the driver to be fully submerged in the experience.
Sounds like F1 probably.
It's absolutely incredible. Yeah. So it's an exhilarating drive. So I definitely would have an LFA. And man, after that, the second one is just, it's hard, because I mean, of course, I'd probably want, maybe a LaFerrari, a Koenigsegg, a Guerra R, a Pagani Huayra. That at that point it becomes hard.
I'm not hearing a daily. Maybe I'm just not dreaming big enough. But
you know what? I guess at that point you can just daily whatever you want, right? Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I don't know. Yeah, those two are probably the dream garage.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna tell you my two. You're probably gonna laugh at this point.
No, what's up?
It would be a Porsche GT3. And
yes.
Then probably, I don't know if it would
now,
be...
Now, why would you think I'd laugh at that? I mean, tell me that.
You just told me Koenigsegg to daily, and I'm thinking GT3 is
now,
like
if you would have probably
crazy,
given me like a third car, like I'd probably daily a GT3.
Yeah.
I would have 100% daily a GT3. Okay. Like that car, that's another one that your experience is just because the way that, especially if you have one with an exhaust.
For sure.
So the exhaust note from 0 RPMs to 3,000 RPMs is a single pitch.
Yeah.
3,000 to 6,000 is a different pitch, and 6,000 to 9,000 is a different pitch. Mm-hmm. And then with the PDK, like downshifts on those things, like you feel like you're a race car driver.
And the pops.
Oh man, that car tricks you to think you're a better driver than what you actually are. Yeah. So what's your second one?
So my second one, I don't know if it would be a G-Wagon or a Cybertruck. And just because I would think that would be the practical. But now I'm rethinking everything. You just told me some crazy cars. I need to dream bigger.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
But
I don't know. You've probably driven all those, right? So
haven't driven a Cybertruck, but I have zero interest in EVs. And I mean nothing against them. Like I need feedback.
Yeah.
I need some soul, I need some sound, I need something, and the electric is just like, they look cool, but like
and G-Wagon, that's probably like everybody's like G-Wagon, right?
Yeah, I mean there's just the G-Wagons are fun, especially the newer ones. I think that'd be a good one. Yeah. They're pretty cool, especially a G63.
Yeah, I think that would be the way to go.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm gonna have to rethink after hearing you Koenigsegg and everything crazy. I've never even driven a GT3 yet. So
dude,
I need to do
it
that
will
for sure.
ruin you. It will absolutely. That'll be all you think about.
Yeah. So have you lost your love? People say sometimes if you make the thing you love, it becomes work, it becomes business. Like, are you just as passionate for cars as you were from day one?
That doesn't go away. It's probably gotten worse, honestly.
Really?
Yeah, because it's like now you just want everything. And since you get a little taste of everything, it's like you want. I have bought cars that people have brought into consign because I accidentally parked it in front of my desk and I got to stare at it all day. And it's like,
Man, that's dangerous.
I would
be worried about working.
Yeah, it's like
I
need that car.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What's your garage look like these days?
Okay, so I've got my wife daily drives a Lexus CT200, a little hybrid vehicle that gets her from point A to point B because she drives a lot. She's a hospice marketer.
Yeah.
Her weekend car, her mom car is a Cayenne Turbo. And then my daily driver is a DBX, Aston Martin DBX. And then the fun cars, I've got a Ferrari FF that I put the kid in the back seat on. So it's a 4-seater front engine V12 Ferrari.
Nice.
Can't beat that. I still have the Gallardo, gated Gallardo, an SF90, a Seto Fiorano package. I've got a Blue Lightning, 03 Sonic Blue Lightning.
Okay.
03 Sonic Blue Terminator Cobra to match the Lightning. And then a 2003 Harley Davidson F-150. And the F-150, the Harley Davidson, I was more excited to find that truck than I was whenever I got the SF90. Yeah, and then
that's crazy.
I've got a RS6 Avant on the way, so that'll probably be here in a couple months. But yeah, that Harley F-150 I was hunting for 20 years. Yeah. That was one of those where you're like, whenever you're younger, like what started it? I was 13 years old whenever I saw that truck on the showroom floor at Joe Cooper in Yukon, and I told myself one day, I said, I'm gonna find the newest, close to newest one possible, right? Lowest mileage. And I spoke it into existence because back then, this was probably 5-6 years ago. I've had 2 of them up until this point. This one's my 3rd because I'm looking for just a perfect spec.
Yeah.
And I spoke it into. I said I want one that some old man had in his garage, has under 5,000 miles.
Just to church on Sundays.
Go to church on Sundays.
Yeah.
Take it to the grocery store, park it back in a climate controlled garage. And then he's going to pass away one day and his family's not going to want it. They're going to sell it. And I said, it's probably going to cost me $50,000, but I don't care. Like that's what that's what I want. I was hunting for that truck. My wife says it's weird. It kind of looks like a Mexican truck, which is whatever. Well, I don't know what that means, but I probably like chrome wheels, two-tone, whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm Mexican, so it's cool. And so 2 months ago, my sister tags me in an auction. And I'm looking through these cars and I see a picture of a Corvette, but behind the Corvette, there's the Harley. And it's the two-tone. It's the black with silver, 100th anniversary. They only made it that year. It's super special, to me at least. I'm like, I want that. Like, what's the details? Yeah. And I go to look at it. The thing has 2,000 miles on it.
No way.
Yeah. And it's in Lawton.
Crazy.
It's in Lawton of all places. And so it's like, all right, this is it. Like, this is the truck. Like, we got to go bid on it. And I was just going to bid online, but my wife was like, let's just go down there. Like, let's make a day trip out of it. Let's go down there. Because, in her mind, she knew how passionate I was about this truck. She was like, it's coming home with us. So might as well just go down there, pick it up, and drive it back.
Sure.
And so I was calling a buddy of mine. He's like, what number do I put in my mind? He's like, you have to be careful because you're going to get emotional. You're going to get down there. You're going to be in the heat of the moment. You have to set your limit because if not, you're going to overpay for this thing.
Yeah.
So my number in my mind was 41 because at that, you still have to add 10%, for an auction fee. Needless to say, got down to the bidding. I didn't come in until the end. I let 2 guys bid on it, and it got to like 38. Man, it's already real close. And so, all right, so I feel like, the auctioneer's like, all right, any other bids, blah, 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 talking so fast you can't even understand what he's saying. And then it's like, all right, now it's time for me to get in. So I raise my hand. And it's like, I raise my hand, and it goes up to 39. And then the other guy goes 39.5. And then it's like, all right, I'm still in. It got to 41 like that. And I'm like, do I go over? It's like, yep, $500 more. And then I only went over by $3,000, so it wasn't a ton.
Yeah.
But needless to say, she came home with me.
That's
so
awesome.
that hunt is over. Yeah.
And the Lightnings from Fast and the Furious, is that why you wanted the Lightning?
No, I like that generation.
Okay.
It's there was one in Fast and Furious, the red one.
Yeah.
I just think those trucks are cool. They just don't make them like that anymore. Now I sound like that old guy. It's like, oh, back in the day, they don't make them like this anymore. And they don't, Yeah. So those trucks are just they're special.
I'm sure you've got bigger dreams now, right?
Yeah, and so we're expanding into not just our sales, but we're also going to have like a detail department. We're going to do full service detail to the public, service to the public. So really, it's just growing that and just seeing where God takes us. That one of the biggest things that I've learned throughout this whole experience is that because I didn't plan for any of this. If I were too busy trying to plan my own life and where I wanted to go, I would be too busy and distracted to hear where God wants me to be.
You always hear the opposite. Everybody always tells you have a plan, where you want to be, where do you see yourself in 5 years, right?
My thinking was so small and God's picture was so much bigger that it's like I'm not even going to waste time thinking or trying to plan about where I want to be because I'm not going to listen to where he wants me to be. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll have to have another one just talking about cars because I didn't, a testimony took up a lot of time, but
it's all good.
And then a follow up in a couple of years to kind of where we're at, see where we're going.
Yeah. So before we sign off, I want to give you the stage. Where can people find you? If they're in the market for a car, I did see before we sign off, I did see where you got like national attention for the SUV that you guys imported.
Yeah, so we didn't import it.
You didn't?
Yeah, we're consigning it for somebody.
It just blew up.
Oh,
right?
Dude, it was on everything. It was on the drive. Because it's a non-US spec vehicle.
Yeah.
And we have the owner of the car has a title for it. They're like, how? It's like, listen, I'm not asking questions. But the problem that a lot of people were understanding at that point is like, well, you can't sell it in the States. It's like, guys, I sell worldwide.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not supposed to buy this in the States because if
is it safety regulations?
I think it's safety rating, EPA or something like that. But I mean, there's an Oklahoma title. Like you can drive it on the streets of Oklahoma. And everyone's like, oh, well, if the Fed sees it or whatever, it's like, I get it, I understand, but I'm not just selling to the States. And so it's like, this thing can go back out of the country. So it's like, everyone's like, oh, you're selling something and you're being a fraud. And it's like, no, we're not. Like,
I was just doing a deep dive in the comments. People were just going
they were
crazy.
saying
Everybody was an expert.
This guy, it's like this guy's scamming people. And it's like, I'm not scamming anybody. I'm not forcing you to buy the car. Right. Do your due diligence. If you can register this car in your state, great, buy it. If you can't, then don't, because it might go out of country. Like, why am I going to not sell this car if it's going to go back to, a different country?
Yeah.
So it's like they're thinking, again, going back to how, it's like, oh, well, your dealership's not going to be successful because you're only going to sell it in Oklahoma. All those people that were talking online, like, they don't realize that I sell worldwide.
Right.
So,
and they're all import experts all of a sudden.
Oh, yeah.
Like everybody knows.
Yeah, they've done it or whatever. So,
yeah. That was the other question I was going to have is the importing of like the Japanese cars, right? Like GTR, stuff like that. I'm sure you've done some of that too, right?
R34s are going to start getting hot. They've hit the 25-year mark.
Yeah.
We've sold a few. Right now, I've got an R33 Skyline. We've got an S15 Sylvia. We've sold some JDM cars. Those are a lot easier because they're older than the 25 year rule.
Yeah.
So those are a little bit easier. But we don't do any importing. Those cars that we get, we're selling them for people.
Okay.
So we don't own the cars. We're consigning them. So yeah.
Very cool. Mm-hmm. So what's the best place if people want to, follow you? I don't know if you got personal social media that's public.
And then also my social media is public. You can follow me, search my name, Eliud Villarreal. For our business, you can find us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and just Exotic Motorsports of Oklahoma.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for your time, man. I really enjoyed it. I think we're going to have to geek out.
For sure.
Cars and everything else.
I'm down, man.
For sure.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the super talented Eliud Villarreal right here on the Maverick Podcast. In dreams, we trust.